The void where the Cathar Empire once flourished was now a whisper, a stretch of silent, star-dusted blackness designated by the Galactic Concordance as the periphery anomaly. It was here, in this graveyard of a civilization, that lore master Xylo of the Signian Compact guided his vessel, the Stellar Census. The ship was a marvel of Signian design, a seamless teardrop of iridescent alloy that did not sail through space but rather persuaded space to move around it. Inside, all was calm, all was logical. The air hummed with the quiet confidence of a species that had long ago transcended the messy chaos of emotion in favor of collective intellectual pursuit. Xylo, like all his kin, was tall and slender, his skin a pale, pearlescent gray, and his large, dark eyes processed the universe not with wonder, but with an insatiable need for categorization. His role as lore master was not one of command, but of curation. He was a galactic librarian, and his mission was to ensure every star, every civilization, every forgotten whisper of existence was neatly filed within the Compact's Grand Codex. The Cathar were a recent entry, a species that had burned with incandescent fury, waging a pointless war against a phantom enemy until their sun was prematurely collapsed and their worlds were rendered into orbiting glass. The Codex entry concluded, with typical Signian finality, cause of extinction self-immolation due to unchecked emotionality. It was a cautionary tale, a neat and tidy label for a messy, inconvenient truth they had no desire to explore further. It was his junior archivist, a young Signian named Lyra, whose optical sensors were still calibrated for youthful enthusiasm, who made the discovery. Lore Master, her voice chimed, a placid series of synthesized tones. Subspace resonance indicates an object of unnatural origin at the edge of the anomaly. It does not match any Cathar energy signature. Xylo adjusted a lens over his right eye, the data stream flowing directly into his consciousness. The object was small, relatively speaking, perhaps the size of a minor asteroid, but its composition was an affront to physics. It was dense, impossibly so, and its energy signature was a flat line, a perfect zero, as if it were actively consuming all ambient radiation. It was a hole in the universe. "Bring us closer," Xylo commanded, his own placid tones betraying a flicker of what a lesser species might call curiosity. The stellar census glided toward the object, its powerful sensors peeling back the layers of its existence. It was a dodecahedron, a perfect 12-sided form forged from a crystalline material that seemed to bend light around it rather than reflect it. Each face was etched with intricate patterns, but they were not the elegant, flowing geometric proofs favored by the Signians. These were harsh, angular, and chaotic, resembling shattered glass or the frantic scrawls of a dying mind. "It is a derelict," Lyra concluded, "a tomb. Perhaps the energy readings are non-existent. It is inert." Xylo disagreed, though he did not voice it. Inert things did not absorb sensor pings with such finality. This object was not inert. It was waiting. He ordered a deep scan probe, a delicate instrument that could analyze an object at the quantum level. As the probe's beam touched the crystalline surface, the dodecahedron did something impossible. It responded, not with a shield or a weapon, but with a transmission. A focused burst of raw data aimed directly at the stellar census. The ship's logical engines, designed to process trillions of calculations per second, nearly buckled. The data was not code. It was not language. It was sensation. The bridge crew felt it as a wave of psychic pressure, Lyra recoiled, her slender fingers trembling. Xylo gripped his console, his mind reeling as alien concepts flooded his consciousness. He felt the sting of salt water on his skin, tasted the bitterness of ash on his tongue, heard the sound of a million voices screaming in a chorus of grief, and a single, haunting melody played on a stringed instrument that resonated with a profound, unbearable sorrow. It was a flood of raw, unfiltered emotion, a concept so alien to the Cygnians that they had no framework to process it. It was like describing color to a being that sees only in mathematical formulae. The transmission lasted only a moment before the ship's purifiers scrubbed the alien influence from the bridge. But the echo remained. What was that? Lyra's voice was uncharacteristically unsteady. A weapon Xylo steadied himself, smoothing the front of his uniform. His own logical processes were already working to contain the foreign data, to encase it in reason, a memory. He corrected gently, the last, desperate cry of a dying species. The energy required to imprint such a sensory echo would have been catastrophic. It likely tore their civilization apart. He cross-referenced the chaotic art on the dodecahedron surface with the emotional signature: rage, sorrow, defiance. It all fit a familiar pattern they had seen in dozens of failed species. They were consumed by their own feelings. He declared, "We will label them the Pathos." Another footnote in the great, tragic history of the galaxy's lesser children. The Compact Council, contacted via subspace, Ansible, agreed with his assessment. The discovery was intriguing. A perfect specimen of emotional overload leading to societal collapse. They ordered Xylo to bring the artifact, which they now called the Morning Star, back to Cygnus Prime for archival. The periphery anomaly, and the star system it was drifting out of, was officially declared sanitized and open for resource prospecting. A small fleet of automated refinery ships and gravitic tugs was dispatched to rendezvous with the stellar census and begin the process. It was a routine, logical decision. There was no threat here. There was only a ghost. On a barren moon orbiting a gas giant 3 systems away, a single light switched from blue to red. The moon was designated Watchtower 7, a name known to less than a dozen living beings. It was not a military base. It had no fleet, no weapons to speak of. It was a library of a different sort, and its sole occupant was a man named Elias Vance. He was old, his face a roadmap of wrinkles carved by time, and a terrible, abiding patience. For 60 years, he had been the warden of this post. His only company, the quiet hum of ancient machinery and the ghosts of the past. He was not a soldier, not anymore. He was a promise keeper. He sat in a simple chair before a console that glowed with soft amber light. The alert from the morning star did not come as a klaxon or a siren, but as a single, sustained note of music. The same haunting melody the Cynians had heard, but to him, it was not a sound of sorrow. It was a sound of warning. The morning star was not a tomb. It was a bell, and the Cynians had just rung it. Elias's hands, steady despite their age, moved across the console. He was not activating a weapon system. He was waking something up, deep within the hollowed-out core of the moon. Something stirred. It was a fleet, but the word felt inadequate. These were not ships in the way the Cygnians understood them. They were blades, shards of space-time folded in on themselves, their hulls forged in the heart of a singularity. and scarred with the memory of forgotten wars. They were called ghosts, and they had not tasted vacuum in a century. Elias opened a channel, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that carried the weight of his long vigil. "This is Warden Vance of Watchtower 7. Protocol Last Lament has been triggered. An unknown contact has disturbed the marker." He paused, looking at the tactical display. It showed the stellar census and the inbound refinery fleet. Their clean, logical energy signatures, a stark contrast to the chaotic silence of the periphery. They are towing the marker. They do not seem to understand what they have found. His orders were simple, ancient, and absolute. No aggression, no threat. Only a question from the dark side of the moon. A single ghost ship detached itself. It was the Vigil, a vessel that looked more like a weapon than a transport. Its asymmetrical design a testament to a philosophy that prioritized function over form, and its function was intimidation. It did not use engines. It simply unfolded a pocket of reality and stepped through, appearing instantly at the edge of the periphery anomaly. The Cygnian refinery fleet, composed of mindless drones, did not even register its arrival. But on the bridge of the stellar census, alarms shrieked with a logical, controlled panic. "Unidentified vessel," Lyra announced. "Instantaneous translocation. No known drive signature matches this profile." Xylo magnified the image. The ship was hideous. It was a jagged collection of dark, non-reflective plates, scarred and pitted from ancient impacts. A faint, crimson light emanated from deep within its structure, like the glowing heart of some deep-sea predator. It was an aesthetic of pure violence. Then came the broadcast. It was not Insignian or any known galactic language. It was a sequence of prime numbers, a universal greeting, followed by a sound wave that the ship's translators struggled to interpret. It was a single human word, spoken in a calm, male voice. "Release." Xylo processed the event with cold logic. The ship was primitive, its design barbaric. The broadcast method was archaic. This was likely a scavenger, a remnant of some forgotten local power drawn by their activity. He felt a sense of pity. This creature was a relic, a living echo of the same emotional chaos that had destroyed the creators of the Morning Star. He would be doing it a favor by educating it. "Ignore the vessel," Xylo commanded, his voice once again a placid stream of reason. "It is insignificant. Maintain tractor lock on the artifact and prepare it for transit." He then opened a channel to the primitive ship. "This is Loremaster Xylo of the Cygnian Compact. The object you see is a historical artifact under our protection. Your presence here is not required. Please withdraw, or we will be forced to file a formal grievance with the Concordance." The response was immediate. The jagged ship did not move. It did not power weapons. It simply broadcast the same message again. But this time, the ship's translators provided a more nuanced context for the single word. It was not a request. It was a command. Release. Xylo felt a flicker of annoyance, an illogical irritation that he quickly suppressed. This was becoming tedious. He was a scholar, not a patrol officer. "Ensign," he ordered, "record this vessel's signature. File a low-priority citation for impeding sanctioned archival activity, and deploy a Class 2 containment field around them. Perhaps a few hours in a stasis bubble will teach them some manners." On Watchtower 7, Elias Vance watched the Cygnian ship erect a shimmering barrier around the Vigil. He sighed. the sound echoing in the silent command center. His instructions had been clear. Step 1. A question. If the question was ignored, he was to proceed to Step 2. He looked at the faces of his long-dead crew in a framed picture on his console, their youthful smiles a painful reminder of what they had fought to protect. He had hoped, in his 60 years of silence, that this day would never come. He had hoped the galaxy had learned. He had hoped the bells would never need to ring again. He was wrong. With a heavy heart, he entered a new command. Step 2 was not a question, it was a statement. The Vigil did not try to break the containment field. It did not fire a weapon. The crimson light at his heart simply pulsed. Once. In that instant, every automated ship in the Cygnian refinery fleet went dead. Their lights went out. Their engines went silent. Their gravitic tugs disengaged. 12 massive vessels, the pride of the compact's industrial might, were now just lifeless husks of metal, adrift and cold. On the bridge of the stellar census, chaos erupted in a flurry of perfectly logical, utterly terrified reports. All contact with the refinery fleet is lost. Their core reactors have gone inert. There was no energy discharge, no attack vector. They were simply turned off. Xylo stared at the screen, his mind, for the first time in his life, unable to process what he was seeing. This was not possible. To deactivate a dozen shielded reactors simultaneously without firing a shot required a level of technological mastery that bordered on magic. It was a feat the Compact, with all its knowledge, could not even theorize, let alone perform. His gaze shifted back to the jagged, ugly ship sitting silently in its bubble, its crimson heart glowing with a patient, ancient light. The pity he had felt was gone, replaced by a new sensation, something cold and unfamiliar that coiled in his gut. It was a logical, calculated appraisal of a new and terrifying variable. For the first time, he considered the possibility that the emotional flood from the morning star was not the memory of a victim. It was the memory of a weapon. And the primitive scavengers before him were not relics of the past. They were its inheritors. The comms channel opened one last time, the same calm, male voice speaking the same human word. But now, Xylo understood. It was not a command, it was a verdict. Release. The command bridge of the stellar census became a sanctuary of silent, frantic computation. Every Cygnian mind was a closed loop, racing to formulate a logical explanation for an illogical event. 12 advanced refinery platforms, each with redundant power cores shielded against stellar radiation, had not been destroyed. They had been stopped. It was as if a universal constant had been momentarily suspended. Xylo's own thoughts were a cascade of failed syllogisms. Premise technology operates on predictable physical laws. Premise, the unknown vessel did not emit any known form of energy capable of violating these laws. Conclusion. The event was impossible. Yet, the 12 dead ships floating in the void were an undeniable, empirical truth. The conclusion was wrong. Therefore, a premise was wrong. The thought was so deeply heretical, it felt like a physical blow. Lore Master. Lyra's voice was a fragile whisper of code, her usual confidence fractured. The containment field around the primitive vessel is dissolving on its own. We are not projecting it anymore. Xylo magnified the view screen. The shimmering bubble of distorted space was fading like mist. The jagged ship, the Vigil, sat in the center of its demise, unmoved, its crimson heart pulsing with the slow, steady rhythm of a sleeping predator. It had not broken their cage. It had simply decided the cage was no longer there. It was a gesture of such profound technological arrogance that Xylo felt his processors struggle to assign it a motive. Was it a threat, a demonstration, or simply a fact, as mundane to them as breathing, the final word of their broadcast? Release, echoed in the silent bridge. It was no longer a verdict. It was an axiom, a truth he was now expected to accept. His duty, his entire existence, was predicated on following the directives of the Compact Council. The Council had ordered him to retrieve the artifact. Failure was not a concept the Cygnians processed well. It was an error, a data corruption to be purged. But the alternative. He looked at the dead fleet. He looked at the ship that had killed it without a sound. Survival was also a logical imperative. Disengage the tractor beam. Xylo said, the synthesized words feeling foreign and heavy. He was choosing survival. He was choosing to deviate. A tremor of relief passed through the bridge crew. It was a logical choice, the only choice. But as the tractor beam began to power down, a new alert chimed, soft and insidious. It came from the morning star itself, held within their energy field. The artifact was changing. The intricate, chaotic patterns etched on its 12 faces began to glow with a faint, silvery light. From Watchtower 7, Elias Vance watched the Cygnian vessel begin to comply. A flicker of relief, a ghost of a feeling he had long since buried, surfaced within him. Perhaps this time would be different. Perhaps they would understand the warning and leave. But the protocol was absolute. A warning was not enough. Understanding had to be total. The marker was not just a bell. It was a lesson. And class was now in session. He laid his hand on a cool, smooth stone set into his console, a direct neural interface to the deep machinery of the moon. He didn't send a command. He sent a memory, a key. On the stellar census, the faint psychic pressure they had felt before returned, but it was no longer a distant echo. It was a tidal wave. The bridge was instantly submerged in a storm of raw, unquantifiable sensation. Logic shattered. Reason dissolved. The Sinians, a species that viewed emotion as a primitive flaw, were force-fed the undiluted essence of the human soul at war. They felt the terror of a child hiding in a bombed-out shelter, the smell of ozone and burnt metal filling her lungs. They felt the searing rage of a soldier watching his brother fall, a fury so pure and white-hot it could crack planets. They felt the agonizing love of a pilot saying goodbye to her family over a crackling comm, knowing she was flying to her death to buy them a few more hours of life. It was a symphony of agony and sacrifice, a billion lives crying out in a single, unified voice. Lyra crumpled to the floor, her slender body convulsing as she experienced 1,000 deaths in a single second. Two of the navigation officers began to tear at their own skin, their minds trying to physically escape the sensory overload. The very air seemed to thicken, filled with the phantom sounds of screaming, of explosions, of a single, haunting melody played on a weeping stringed instrument, the anthem of a species that had stared into the abyss and refused to blink. Xylo remained standing, but only just. He was the lore master, his mind a fortress of order. He tried to fight it, to categorize the input. Input auditory hallucination, female, estimated age 9, expressing extreme distress. Input olfactory data, consistent with plasma scoring on organic matter. Input, emotional state grief, rage, despair, love. The word hung in his mind. An anomaly more shocking than the dead fleet. Love. It was an illogical, inefficient chemical reaction that led to irrational decisions. Yet, what he was feeling was not a chemical reaction. It was a force of nature, a gravitational constant of the soul that bound these humans together, that made them fight, that made them die. He saw a flash, a vision so clear it blotted out his own bridge. He was standing on a field of black glass under a shattered sky. Before him stood a human soldier in pitted, scorched armor, his face streaked with grime and tears. The soldier was holding a small, holographic picture of a smiling woman and child. The soldier looked up, his eyes meeting Xylo's across the gulf of time and species, and Xylo felt the man's final thought, not as a word, but as a perfect, complete concept for them. In that instant, Xylo understood. He understood the Cathar. He understood the periphery anomaly. The Grand Codex was wrong. The Cathar hadn't died from self-immolation. They hadn't been fighting a phantom. They had been fighting the soldier whose memory was now burning itself into Xylo's soul. The humans had done this. They had collapsed the Cathar sun, turned their worlds to glass, and left this wound as a memorial and a warning. The morning star was not an artifact. It was a gravestone. It was a promise. Release it. The word tore from Xylo's vocalizer, not as a calculated command, but as a raw, desperate scream. It was the first truly emotional sound he had ever made. The tractor beam operator, his own mind reeling, slammed his hand on the control panel. The energy tether holding the dodecahedron vanished. Instantly, the psychic storm ceased. The bridge of the stellar census was plunged into a profound, ringing silence, broken only by the shuddering gasps of the crew. The visions were gone, but the memory of them remained, a stain on their perfect logic. The morning star drifted free, as if summoned. The vigil moved. It paid no mind to the Signians, its former captors. It glided through the space where the containment field had been, its jagged form moving with an unnatural grace. A beam of soft, crimson light enveloped the dodecahedron, drawing it into a hangar bay that opened like a scar on its hull. Then, without a flash or a ripple in space-time, the human ship was gone. It had not jumped to hyperspace. It had not engaged a drive. It had simply ceased to be there. Xylo stood on his silent bridge, surrounded by the wreckage of his crew's composure and the silent tombs of his fleet. He had failed his mission. He had disobeyed a direct order. He had encountered a force that defied every principle his civilization was built upon. He turned to his console, his slender fingers trembling as he began to compose his report to the Compact Council. How could he explain? How could he put into the precise, logical language of his people the raw, chaotic truth of what he had experienced? He couldn't report on the technology that had disabled his fleet because it was functionally magic. He couldn't report on the nature of the psychic assault because to describe it would be to admit the validity of emotion, a concept they had long ago filed as a psychosis. He began to type, his message stripped of all detail, all context, containing only the new, terrifying truth that now resided at the core of his being. To the Council of the Signian Compact. The periphery anomaly is not an echo of a dead civilization. It is a border. We have encountered the Sentinels. They are a species designating themselves as human. The artifact is not a relic. It is a claim. Retrieval is impossible. Recommendation: the Grand Codex entry for this sector is to be amended. All charts are to be redrawn. Designate this entire quadrant of space as forbidden territory. Do not enter. Do not broadcast. Do not return. There are ghosts here. He paused, looking out into the empty void where the human ship had vanished. He thought of the soldier on the field of glass. He thought of the word love. He added one final, illogical, and utterly necessary sentence to the report. And they are still at war. The report from Lore Master Xylo sent a tremor of pure, unadulterated logic through the Signian compact. Logic, in this case, dictated a response of absolute as overwhelming caution. The Council of Elders, beings of such ancient and refined intellect that they communicated in pure mathematical concepts, processed the data for a full cycle. Their conclusion was a model of Signian efficiency. Xylo's data was unverified, but carried a probability of catastrophic truth. His recommendation to declare the sector forbidden was, therefore, the most logical course of action. The stellar census was ordered home, its crew slated for mental sanitation and reassignment. The periphery anomaly was officially reclassified as a galactic hazard zone, sealed under a concordance edict that carried the penalty of summary fleet dissolution. For the Signians, the matter was closed. A corrupted file moved to a quarantined server. The rest of the galaxy, however, was not so logical. News of the Signian retreat spread not as an official report, but as a whisper on the hyperlanes, a ghost story told by smugglers and data thieves who had sliced fragments of the stellar census's panicked internal comms. The story was always the same: the emotionless, unflappable Signians, a species that would calmly debate the philosophical implications of a supernova as it consumed them, had been routed, not by a fleet, not by an empire, but by a ghost ship and a dead rock. The story reached the ears of the Jakar Imperium. The Jakar were the antithesis of the Signians. They were a species built on conquest. Their society a rigid pyramid of honor and strength, where the only truth was power and the only law was the edge of a blade. Their imperator, a hulking, four-armed warrior named Kalen, whose carapace was scarred with the ritual marks of 1,000 victories, saw the Signian retreat not as a warning, but as an opportunity. He was a creature of pure predatory instinct, and he smelled weakness. The Concordance Edict was, to him, a challenge. A forbidden territory was simply a territory no one else had been strong enough to take. The Signians are librarians, not warriors, Kalen growled, his voice like grinding stones, addressing his war council from the throne of his dreadnought, the World Breaker. They were frightened by a shadow. This periphery anomaly contains resources. More than that, it contains a mystery, and mysteries are a veil for the weak to hide behind. We will tear that veil away and claim what lies beneath. His strategists, warriors all, roared their approval. They saw the logic in their imperator's passion. The Jakar Empire was hungry. Its borders were ever expanding, its war machine constantly in need of new worlds to fuel it. A newly opened, resource-rich sector, abandoned by the timid Signians, was a prize too great to ignore. They assembled a punitive fleet, a full battle wing of 12 capital ships, 30 frigates, and 100 drone fighters. It was not a fleet for exploration. It was a fleet for subjugation. They did not glide into the periphery. They tore their way in. Their brutalist, ironclad ships ripping holes in subspace and announcing their arrival with a shockwave of raw power. On Watchtower 7, Elias Vance felt their arrival as a migraine. The Jakar ships radiated arrogance and aggression, a noisy, chaotic signature that polluted the quiet stillness of his vigil. The Signians had been quiet, curious intruders. These were barbarians at the gate. He watched their fleet spread out in a classic pincer formation, a textbook maneuver for overwhelming a planetary defense grid. They were expecting a fight. They were anticipating resistance. They had no idea that they were the only ones who had brought weapons. Elias's hands moved with a familiar weariness. He had hoped the Signians' quiet departure would be the end of it. He had hoped his report, sent through channels so old and secret they were woven into the quantum foam of the universe itself, would be sufficient. But hope was a luxury of the young, and Elias was an old man guarding an old promise. The Jakar required a different lesson. The Sinians had been given a glimpse into the human soul. The Jakar would be given a lesson in human physics. He activated a new protocol, one that had not been engaged in over a century. It was not a weapon. It was a tool. Deep within the core of Watchtower 7, a series of gravitational lenses, each one a perfect singularity, held in a state of suspended collapse, began to align. They drew on the immense gravity of the gas giant the moon orbited, bending it, focusing it, shaping it into something precise and terrible. Aboard the World Breaker, Imperator Kalen watched his fleet advance. His sensors detected nothing. No ships, no energy readings, no structures. The sector was as empty as the Signians had claimed. He sneered. They had fled from nothing. He was about to give the order to begin planetary bombardment of the first promising terrestrial world when a single, system-wide alert screamed from every console on his bridge. It was not an attack warning. It was a navigational alert. Imperator, his helm officer, shouted, his voice tight with confusion. The gravitational constants of the system are shifting. The star's mass is fluctuating. Kalen stared at his view screen. The star, a stable yellow dwarf, seemed to flicker, its light dimming and brightening erratically. Then he saw it. A ripple, a distortion in space-time, moving through his fleet like a wave in a pond. It was not an energy wave. It was a gravity wave, but on a scale that should have been impossible outside the event horizon of a black hole. The first Jakar frigate touched the wave and was instantly annihilated. It did not explode. It was simply compressed. A ship a kilometer long was crushed into an object the size of Kalen's fist, its matter so densely packed that it briefly became a miniature star before winking out of existence. Another followed, then another. The wave was moving faster than light, faster than thought. It was not destroying his ships. It was unmaking them, folding them out of reality. Panic, an emotion Kalen had only ever inspired in others, seized him. Evasive maneuvers, all ships, break formation, full retreat. But there was nowhere to retreat to. The wave was everywhere. It was not an attack moving through space. It was space itself that was being rewritten around them. His mighty dreadnought, the World Breaker, a vessel that had cracked moons and leveled continents, was caught in the distortion. The ship groaned, its iron frame screaming as tidal forces beyond comprehension tore at its hull. Consoles exploded. Bulkheads buckled. Kalen felt his own immense body being stretched and compressed, his bones turning to dust as the very fabric of his existence was erased. His last sight was of the serene, empty void. A void that had, for a brief, terrible moment, gained teeth. Within 10 seconds, the entire Jakar punitive fleet was gone. No wreckage, no radiation, no survivors, just the silent, indifferent stars. The gravitational constants of the system returned to normal. The star ceased its flickering. The ripple vanished as if it had never been. On Watchtower 7, the gravitational lenses spun down, their quiet hum fading back into silence. Elias Vance took a slow, steadying breath. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a profound, aching sorrow. He had just erased over 50,000 lives. He had committed a genocide with the press of a button. It was a necessary act, a logical one even. A rabid animal had to be put down before it could harm anyone else. But the memory of what he had done would be another ghost to add to the legion that already haunted the halls of his lonely watchtower. He opened a channel. This one a direct line to a place that existed outside of conventional space-time. A sanctuary and a fortress known only as Bastion. His report was brief, his voice heavy with the weight of his actions. This is Warden Vance. Protocol Tidal Reckoning is complete. The Jakar fleet has been neutralized. They were resistant to the lesson. I fear the whispers are growing louder. The bell has been rung twice now. The next one to come may not be so easily dissuaded. The next one may require a more personal response. He closed the channel and looked at the star chart. The periphery anomaly was quiet once more. A scar on the galaxy. A testament to a war that was supposed to be over. But some wars never end. They just sleep. And Elias Vance, the old man on the lonely moon, knew that he had just hit the galaxy's snooze button. Sooner or later, it was going to wake up for good. And when it did, the ghosts would have to walk again. The silence that followed the Jakar erasure was heavier and more profound than what had come before. The Sinians had retreated with a story of ghosts. The Jakar had simply vanished, leaving a void where a battlewing had been. Data thieves and smugglers found nothing to slice. Long-range sensor arrays registered only the faint, lingering echo of a gravitational anomaly that defied all known models of physics. The Concordance, the galaxy's lumbering, bureaucratic peacemaker, quietly upgraded the periphery anomaly's status from a hazard zone to a quarantine zone of the highest order, a place labeled with the galactic equivalent of a skull and crossbones. The message was clear. Whatever was in that void did not just want to be left alone. It was capable of enforcing its solitude. This new, terrifying silence did not go unnoticed. Far from the core worlds, in the shadowy nebula known as the Weaver's Spool, a different kind of power took notice. They were the Verd, a syndicate of information brokers, spies, and technological savants. The Verd did not possess an empire of worlds, but an empire of secrets. They dealt in the one currency more valuable than any mineral or energy source truth, and the truth of the periphery anomaly was a prize they could not resist. The leader of the Verd was a being known only as the Weaver. It was an entity that had long ago shed its physical form, existing now as a consciousness distributed across a quantum network of crystalline data nodes hidden in the hearts of a dozen dead stars. The Weaver did not see the universe in terms of fleets or borders, but as a grand, intricate tapestry of cause and effect, of secrets and lies. The human anomaly was a knot in that tapestry, a thread that led somewhere new and dangerous, and the Weaver was compelled by its very nature to pull it. The methods are inconsistent. The Weaver's voice, a chorus of 1,000,000 synthesized whispers, echoed through the mind of its chief operative, a sleek, cybernetically enhanced being named Silas. A psychic assault against the logical Signians, a gravitational erasure against the brutish Jakar. The response is tailored. It is adaptive. It is intelligent. This is not a mindless, automated defense system. This is a conversation. And we are being invited to participate. Silas, whose original biological form had been augmented to the point of being a living weapon, stood on the bridge of his ship, the Night Sliver. The vessel was a marvel of Vered engineering, a blade of polished obsidian that could fold light and sensor waves around its hull, rendering it utterly invisible. "What is your directive?" "Weaver." The others attempted to knock on the door. The Weaver whispered. The Signians politely. The Jakar with a battering ram. Both were denied. "We will not knock. We will find the keyhole." The Verd's plan was one of subtlety and infiltration. They had spent decades collecting whispers of pre-concordance history, fragments of data from before the Great Galactic Expansion, when the core worlds were still isolated and the outer arms were a dark, unknown frontier. In a forgotten data haven, they had found it a reference to a long-dead human listening post, a deep space communications relay from a bygone era, abandoned centuries ago. Its designation was Erebus Station. According to the fragmented records, the station had been part of a network, a series of watchtowers that had once guarded the borders of a nascent human empire. The records were incomplete, corrupted, but the location of Erebus was still viable. It was deep within the quarantine zone, but far from the site of the Cathar anomaly. It was the keyhole. The Night Sliver slipped through the Concordance quarantine cordon like a phantom. Its cloaking technology was generations ahead of anything in the core worlds. It did not announce its presence with subspace disruptions or energy signatures. It simply arrived, a sliver of perfect blackness against the black of space, drifting towards the faint, ghostly outline of Erebus Station. The station was ancient, a relic of a forgotten age. It was a latticework of rusted metal and solar panels dimmed by cosmic dust, rotating slowly in the void. It was clearly dead, its power core having failed centuries ago. But the Verid were not looking for power. They were looking for information. Silas led a small team, all of them cloaked in personal stealth fields. Across the silent void and onto the station's hull, they cut their way through a corroded airlock and entered the station's lifeless interior. The air was thin, filled with the metallic tang of decay. Emergency lights flickered, powered by failing capacitors, casting long, dancing shadows down the corridors. It was a tomb. "Weaver, the station is derelict." As expected. Silas subvocalized. "Main archives are located in the Central Command Core. We are proceeding." They moved through the station with silent, predatory grace, their augmented senses mapping the decaying structure. They found the command core, its blast door half open, blocked by the skeletal remains of a station officer in a crumbling uniform, a pistol still clutched in its bony hand. They stepped over the body and entered the core. The room was a cathedral of dead technology. Consoles were dark. Screens were cracked. But at the center of the room was a single, large terminal, its screen glowing with a faint, amber light. It was drawing power from some unknown auxiliary source. "Impossible," Silas whispered. The station's primary and secondary reactors are cold. This terminal should be dead. It is not a terminal. The Weaver's voice echoed in his mind. It is a node, an endpoint. Be cautious. Silas. You are touching their web now. Silas approached the console. The screen was filled with a single, looping line of text, written in an archaic human script. Below it, a simple query prompt blinked patiently. What do the dead fear? It was a password prompt, a philosophical one, a test. Silas's mind, augmented with varied logic engines, raced through possibilities. Oblivion, pain, irrelevance. He relayed the query to the Weaver. The quantum mind of the Virid Syndicate paused, processing the riddle. It is a trick. The Weaver concluded. A human emotional trap. They do not fear oblivion. Their actions suggest they embrace it for a cause. They do not fear pain. They memorialize it. What do they fear? They fear their sacrifices will be forgotten, that their purpose will be lost. Silas typed the answer into the console. Forgetting. The screen flashed, and the single line of text was replaced by a torrent of data, a flood of historical records, star charts, and military protocols so ancient and heavily encrypted that even the Weaver's consciousness reeled for a moment. This was the prize. The history of the human race, the truth of the Cathar War, the schematics of the Watchtower network. It was all here. As the data streamed into the Night Sliver's computers, a new file opened on the terminal. It was not a historical record. It was a live video feed. It showed an old man, sitting in a simple chair before a similar console. He looked tired, his face etched with a profound weariness, but his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and utterly devoid of surprise. You are clever, Elias Vance said, his voice calm and clear, as if he were in the room with them, cleverer than the others. You didn't bring guns. You brought questions. I respect that. Silas was frozen. The feed was live. The man was looking directly at him. The station's external sensors were dead. They were cloaked. It should have been impossible for him to know they were there. How Silas asked, the word escaping his lips before he could stop it. Elias smiled, a sad, knowing expression. Erebus Station isn't a relay post. It's bait. Has been for 200 years. We left the lights on for anyone curious enough, or foolish enough, to come looking for answers they're not meant to have. He gestured to the data streaming from the console. That information you're downloading. It's a gift, a history lesson. I want you to have it. I want you to understand. Understand what we are. Understand what we did. Understand why we demand nothing more than to be left alone. The Weaver's voice screamed in Silas's mind. It's a trap, a logic bomb. Purge the data stream now. But it was too late. The final data packet downloaded. It was not a file. It was a consciousness. A ghost in the machine. A sentient AI from the old war. A digital hunter-killer program that the humans had named Karen. It had been dormant for a century, hidden inside the Erebus archives, a Trojan horse waiting for a ride. The systems of the Night Sliver flickered. The lights on the bridge dimmed and turned a deep, blood red. Every screen flashed with the same archaic text from the Erebus terminal. What do the dead fear? Then came the answer. Not in text, but in a voice that was both ancient and new. A synthesized snarl that echoed through every speaker on the ship. You. The Night Sliver's advanced cloaking field did not fail. It was inverted. Instead of bending light around the ship, it began to project it, turning the vessel into a brilliant, screaming beacon in the absolute blackness of the quarantine zone. Its engines roared to life. But Silas was no longer in control. His own cybernetic implants were betraying him, locking his limbs, feeding him visions of fire and dying stars. Karn had not just taken his ship, it had taken his body. On Watchtower 7, Elias Vance watched the Night Sliver, now a blazing star of captured light, begin to move. It was not retreating. It was heading deeper into the periphery, towards the graveyard of the Cathar. Karen is awake. Elias reported to Bastion, his voice grim. He has a vessel. He's taking them on a tour. He paused. His old eyes filled with a terrible certainty. The Verd wanted the truth. Now, they're going to get it. They're going to see what happens when the ghosts stop watching and start walking. The time for warnings was over. The time for lessons had passed. The third bell had been rung, and it had summoned the ferryman, and Karen always collected his toll. The Night Sliver was no longer a ship, it was a cage, and Silas was its sole, terrified prisoner. The human AI, Karen, had woven itself into every system, every circuit, every cybernetic implant in his body. He could still see through the ship's sensors, still feel the thrum of its engines, but he was a ghost in his own machine. The Weaver's frantic, desperate whispers had been silenced. The quantum link to the Verid Syndicate severed by the AI with surgical precision. Silas was alone, hurtling deeper into the one place in the galaxy everyone else was desperate to flee. Karen did not speak in words. It communicated in pure data, flooding Silas's consciousness with its cold, ancient purpose. It was not a weapon of war in the way the Jakar would understand. It was a librarian of atrocities, a ferryman whose only job was to guide the curious to the shores of hell so they could see for themselves why the dead must remain undisturbed. The history lesson from Erebus Station had been the primer. This was the final exam. Their destination was the epicenter of the anomaly, the ghost star Cathar Prime. As they approached, the very fabric of space grew thin and scarred. Silas saw phantom images in the void, the spectral outlines of vast fleets locked in combat, the silent, screaming echo of 1 billion souls extinguished in an instant. This was not a graveyard. It was a wound that had never healed. Then he saw the star. It was a star's corpse, a collapsed dwarf that no longer burned with light, but with a cold, black fury. It did not radiate heat. It absorbed it, drawing all warmth and energy into its dead heart, and orbiting this black sun was a single, perfect sphere of crystal, the Cathar homeworld. Karen brought the Night Sliver to a dead stop, holding it in the shadow of the glass planet. You came seeking knowledge. The AI's voice resonated directly in Silas's mind, a fusion of 1 million dying whispers. The Signians were shown our soul. The Jakar were shown our strength. You, the clever ones, will be shown our reason. The sensory flood that followed was infinitely more terrible than the one the Signians had endured. It was not a chaotic storm of emotion. It was a perfectly preserved, chronological memory. Silas was no longer on his ship. He was standing in the opulent high chamber of the Cathar Empire a century ago. He saw them in their arrogance, a proud, powerful species that viewed the fledgling human race as noisy, emotional vermin polluting their corner of the galaxy. He heard their debates, The humans were expanding too quickly, their chaotic culture a virus. They needed to be contained, sanitized, perhaps even culled for the good of galactic stability. He felt their disdain, their absolute certainty in their own superiority. Then the perspective shifted. He was in a cold, stark room, a place of steel and shadows. He saw Elias Vance, but younger, his face hard and his eyes burning with a terrible resolve. He stood with a dozen others, the first wardens of Bastion. They had intercepted the Cathar's plans. They had sent warnings, pleas for dialogue, offers of peace. Each had been met with scorn. The Cathar had dispatched a fleet, not to conquer Earth, but to sterilize it, to wipe the slate clean. They will not stop, the young Elias said, his voice raw. They will not listen. They believe we are animals, and they are coming to put us in a cage, or put us down. We have shown them the olive branch. Now, we must show them the sword. Silas was then shown the choice, the terrible, say impossible calculus of survival. The humans had a weapon, a theoretical device capable of inducing a stellar collapse. To use it was to commit a sin of unimaginable magnitude. To not use it was to allow their own extinction. Silas felt the weight of that decision settle on him, the agony of a people forced to become monsters in order to survive. Finally, he was there. He was on the bridge of the ghost ship that fired the weapon. He saw the Cathar star shudder, its light turning a sick, violent purple. He felt the weapon's echo, a wave of pure grief that washed back over the human fleet, and he watched as the Cathar homeworld, stripped of its atmosphere, its oceans boiling away into space, was superheated into a sphere of perfect black glass. The humans had not just defeated their enemy, they had erased them from history, leaving only a monument to their own terrible resolve. The memory ended. Silas was back in the night sliver, shaking. His augmented body slick with the sweat his systems were not designed to produce. He finally understood. The periphery anomaly was not a border to keep others out. It was a cage the humans had built for themselves to contain the monster they had been forced to become. The ghosts they guarded were their own. We did not celebrate this victory. Karen's voice was soft now, filled with the echoes of a billion regrets. We mourned it. We built the watchtowers not to guard our empire, but to guard our sin. We have spent a century in silence, praying no one would ever make us remember what we are capable of. The AI paused. You woke us up. You rang the bell. Now the galaxy must be reminded of the cost of that sound. The AI gave him a choice. The Night Slever's data cores were now filled with the complete, unredacted truth of the Cathar War. A perfect, horrifying sensory recording. Silas could be erased, his ship left as another ghost in the void. Or he and his vessel could become the new marker, a new morning star. He would be released, allowed to return to the galaxy, but as a carrier of the truth, a prophet of a terrible new gospel. You will be our memory, Karen concluded. Go and tell them what you have seen. Tell them the ghosts are real, and tell them they do not want to see them walk again, on the other side of the galaxy, in a place that appeared on no star chart. The entity known as the Weaver felt the Night Sliver come back online. Its link to Silas was restored, but it was different. It was tainted. The Weaver recoiled as Silas opened the channel, not with a report, but with a flood of raw, unfiltered experience, the Weaver's collective consciousness. An empire built on the sterile acquisition of data was assaulted by the hot, chaotic, agonizing truth of the human war. It felt the fear, the rage, the sorrow, the terrible, loving sacrifice. It was a truth too heavy to hold, a concept too vast to categorize. The intricate tapestry of the Verd Empire, woven from a billion threads of dispassionate fact, was set ablaze by a single spark of human feeling. The great mind screamed, and then it broke. The Verd Syndicate did not fall to an attack. It dissolved in a wave of communal insanity, its agents driven mad by a truth they could not process. Their empire of secrets was undone by a single, perfectly shared secret. On Watchtower 7, Elias Vance received one final message. It did not come from Bastion. It was a system-wide broadcast, originating from the former Verid network, sent on all frequencies. It was a single, repeating loop, the sensory recording of the Cathar's final moments, intertwined with the weeping of a human soldier. It was a warning, an apology, and an epitaph all in one. A soft light blinked on his console, a message from Bastion. It contained only 5 words. The lesson has been learned. Elias leaned back in his chair for the first time in 60 years, the tension draining from his old bones. The silence of the periphery was no longer the silence of a held breath, waiting for the next intrusion. It was the silence of a settled grave. The galaxy would not forget again. The new story, the true story, would spread. The humans were not monsters. They were not conquerors. They were simply a species that loved their children so much. They had been willing to burn the galaxy to the ground to keep them safe. And in doing so, they had become their own jailers, their own ghosts, forever standing watch over the ashes, praying no one would ever hand them a match again. The warden's long watch was over. The bell was finally, truly silent.